Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or I'll say good evening. This is Kamaldeep Kaur. I am the president of the International Business Association of Humber College, and we are very delighted to have you all with us here today for the podcast with the twist, Know Your Leadership with Dr. Pierre-Pascal Gendron. Now, my team will introduce themselves.
Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and I am a fourth year international business student and I'm also the project manager in IBA association. And now I'm gonna pass to Jessica.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica. I'm currently in my fourth year at Humber College and I'm taking international business and currently I'm the event planner in IBA. Now I'll pass on to Darian.
Hi, good evening everyone. My name is Darian Colmer. I'm also in my fourth and final year in the International Business Program at Humber. I'm also the Public Relations Officer for the International Business Association.
And now I will pass it on to Jordan, who is our member and executive member and who is the host of this show, and he will be running the show from here.
All right, thank you very much, Kamaldeep. Welcome everybody. My name is Jordan Wong. I'm a third year at the International Business Program and I work in the digital marketing section. And just a quick heads up before we get started, some groundkeeping rules. Please keep your questions towards the end. And when we're done with our moderated discussion, we'll take your questions and you can ask Dr. Gendron any questions you like. So before we begin, slide. We can edit, I'll edit this part out. So before we begin, we're going to discuss about our association. The International Business Association is an association for the international business students here at Humber College. We design events for our students in the program, so that way we can help them improve their business skills through guest lectures who give them experience and insights into the business world and especially towards the international business community here at Humber. Next slide. So this is our agenda for today, and I'd like everybody in the audience to welcome our guest speaker, Pierre-Pascal Gendron, and that's it.
And I went to work strictly in English after that, with occasional projects in French. Switch slides, please. So how did I get here? Well, perhaps like some of you, I had the bad jobs, you know, flipping burgers, selling shirts in department stores, cleaning offices, all of this to gain experience, make some money, and learn things about people and about different industries. After my first stint in grad school, I became an economic analyst at Transport Canada. And for students in my course, that's where actually I did 2 years of benefit cost analysis in transportation projects before I moved on to a small firm in Ottawa that did economic consulting. And then I decided to go to graduate school. So I went to grad school to do my doctorate at the University of Toronto. And then after that, there were no jobs in academia. After that, I think at the time, there were about 10 full-time jobs as professors in Canada. It's a very, very small market. And the demographics of the industry meant that there were a lot of aging professionals in the field who were not retiring. So I ended up working in tax practices of professional services firms in Canada and the Netherlands for a good 7 years. Flip slides, please. So I joined Humber full-time in 2003. I became a coordinator in 2007, so I was hired as a full-time professor of economics. And then we had a really, really exciting new business going on. You may not know that the degree programs are a fairly young enterprise at Humber. We launched 2 of them in 2003, e-business and paralegal studies. In 2008, e-business was rejigged on the common platform along with other new degrees like international business, hospitality and tourism management, HR management, fashion management. And while these programs were in a startup mode, I served as coordinator for many of them, at least for a couple of years, but always with the long-term plan to continue in international business, since this is my natural area in terms of work experience and interest. Flip slide, please. So what else has happened? Well, so the degrees are now mature, as you know. Since 19, we've had an explicit academic exchange partnership with the Centro de Investigaciones Socioeconómicas at Universidad Autónoma de Coahuila in Mexico. And we've had a number of exchange activities involving professors and students so far. It will be important to watch for announcement because we're planning something that will concern students, Humber students who will graduate. So in the coming 2-3 months, just watch for email announcements about the next stage in this partnership. It's, by the way, it's a very, very nice town in northern Mexico. It's not a border town. It's a very nice town in northern Mexico with a tremendous industrial base, including Chrysler, General Motors, Magna. So it's a fairly prosperous city, but not a border town. Switch slides, please. So when I'm not coordinating, when I'm not teaching, what do I do in my activities? Well, I'm an academic by training, so I do conduct scholarly and applied research, much of which I publish. I present guest lectures. I serve as a chair at sessions. I present at conferences, my own work. Also, part of the professional work that we do as academics is we serve as referees for papers to be accepted in scholarly journals, trade journals. That also includes books and books to be published, and also conferences that have scientific committees that review submissions for papers. So this is a normal part of the work. And finally, last but not least, I have an ongoing career as a consultant on fiscal matters, mostly from the international organizations, you know what they are, but also occasionally for NGOs, including a project right now I'm doing for an NGO having to do with typically tax policy, revenue administration, helping mostly developing countries in mobilizing revenues to pay for their programs, their social expenditures, their roads, and so on and so forth. So that's the work I do. Okay, flip slides.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gendron, for your introduction. So we'll now be moving on to the moderated discussion phase. We're going to ask Dr. Gendron various questions in a podcast-like style, so that way we can better gauge and we can learn some of his insights on his experience. So these are the following topics. So we're going to be discussing business and the wider world, current events, thoughts for the future, and finally, visions for the International Business Program. So without further ado, our first question for today is, looking into the current landscape, what are some of the current economic trends you're looking into at the moment?
Okay, thank you, Jordan, for the question. Before I answer, I just wanted to remind attendees, if you have access to a microphone, I think the best thing to keep this as interactive as possible is to write down your question or note it down, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end so you can ask the question using your microphone. That's what I encourage. However, if you do not have access to a working microphone or have technical issues with a microphone or using a phone, in that case, I believe you're able to enter your question in the chat, and Jordan can read the question after we do that. So, okay? So with that, so let me just reread the question. Looking into current landscape, what are the current economic trends you're looking at the moment? I think I would say 3 of them, and perhaps we can develop a little bit more or answer questions. Number 1 is obviously having the global economy transition to a post-COVID era, if you like. And I use the word global with some hesitation, simply because the ability of many countries to do this is very, very uneven. So a lot of countries will do this at their own pace with different capabilities. So it's not as if you're moving a large oil tanker in a different direction. The global economy is made of very disparate parts at different levels of development. Some countries took a bigger hit with COVID. So moving out of this COVID period, which, as you know, economic, psychological, sociological impacts on society is I think the number one issue, I believe. It will, the quality of this transition will dictate a lot of the other outcomes that we face. I think the second one, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a consumer, mortgage holder, a business that borrows money on markets, it's the overhang of consumer debt and corporate debt at the moment that's being built. Canada, for instance, is consumer debt as a percentage of income is quite a high number. It's over 100%. So this really fragilizes the recovery from COVID. And in some countries, you also have ongoing asset bubbles, primarily linked to the real estate, real property market. So this is a pretty dangerous situation. And at the same time, central banks are providing a lot of monetary stimulus to economies. So this is, I think this is a high risk situation. The third one, of course, is the partial disintegration of supply chains to move products, goods from one country to the other. And you might have heard, you know, there's been a shortage of containers. Some countries have been hoarding empty containers. You have difficulty producing goods on demand. You have goods that are tied up in ports. The United States government just announced that they're going to be running the Los Angeles port 24 hours a day now to sort of clear the backlog of containers. So those are the three things. So the transition, the economic transition outside COVID, out of the COVID era, large overhang of debt, both consumer and corporate debt. And the third one would be the partial deterioration of global supply chains, which will take quite a bit of time to rebuild for sure.
Okay, well, thank you for that. My next question is actually related to government spending. In your opinion, has there been a difference between the quantitative easing measures that central banks have done from 2008 and currently the ones that are being conducted currently and in the past for the pandemic?
Well, if I understand your question properly, you're looking at a comparison between the first financial crisis of 2008 and the quantitative easing that was used in those circumstances versus the quantitative easing that we've been going through over the last 2 years. Is that the question?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Is there like a fundamental difference in how it has been conducted then and how it's being conducted now?
Okay, yes, that's an excellent question. Let me take a bit of a detour because I think it's important, as we have an audience of business students, to really think about the causes of the two crises, right? The 2008 crisis emerged in financial markets, and it was the main point of contagion was primarily the subprime mortgage crisis in the United States, which had to do with very, very low quality collateralized securities and derivatives. It was like a sausage made of low quality mortgages. And when people discovered that the sausage wasn't of good quality, there was an unloading of those assets and the market crashed, right? And then it contaminated other sectors of the other areas of the financial sector. And then it propagated to the real economy. The COVID crisis is quite different. COVID crisis actually emerged in the real economy. It hobbled the ability of workers, labor, and institutions to work properly. You had lockdowns, you had sanitary measures, you had a partial destruction of supply chains. So it was really real sector oriented, and then it affected financial markets. So we came to those crises from different places. So in 2008, quantitative easing at that time was new. So in that respect, central banks took out the guns, if you like, and they decided, okay, to prevent risk-adjusted yields from rising very quickly. We're going to buy private sector debt, so corporate bonds, other securities, other debt securities, corporate bonds, to keep yields low so that people borrow and prevent prices from, yields low and prices from crashing for those bonds, okay? This was relatively new in 2008. Now, during the COVID crisis, the central banks thought this would work again, and they did this again, but to a much larger extent. So for the last 2 years now, central banks are still buying bonds. The Federal Reserve in the United States still has a bond buying program. The Bank of Canada still has a bond buying program. Again, we're talking about private sector bonds. Of course, they buy government bonds too. They always have. But in 2008, central banks found that this would not be enough. There was not enough outstanding government debt to buy in order to prevent the economy from tanking completely. So now it's the extent and duration of the buying that's been more pronounced, and the big central bank, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of Canada are talking all the time about at some point tapering those purchases, bringing them down, but they're still going on. So now the duration and the extent of this, the quantitative easing are much more pronounced this time. And it's difficult. I think the economy's stock prices are now hooked on this. And the concern, of course, is that if you stop buying bonds and at some point start unloading some of those bonds on the markets, that it will trigger a stock price crash, right? So there's a big concern. How do you go back to a normal economy? We don't know what that is anymore, right?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. There's a lot of uncertainty out there for sure.
Right.
And our final question for the business and the wider world section is, price inflation was one of the concerns that many have had with the large increase in government spending. As of now, price inflation in Canada is at 4.1 from lows of 2% from before. So despite claims of transitory inflation, as some in the government have said, do you think fears of hyperinflation are a genuine concern at the moment?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think there are a couple of angles, and in fact, we come back from even a bit lower. 2% has been the preferred target for the Bank of Canada for a number of years, but prior to COVID, we've had quarters or years at 1.5, 1.4, 1.7. So sometimes we've been below that, and they have been pre-COVID. The bank has been very, very conservative in that, and they have tolerated actually lower inflation than their target. The target is 2% rate per annum, so measured by the CPI, but within a band of 1 to 3%, right? So now if you say 4.1%, you're actually outside the band. The governor of the Bank of Canada claims that it's transitory, but he's been claiming the transitory nature for a while now. So as many of you may suspect, you can't say that forever. At some point, the pressures may become more longer lasting, which calls for different things. So we're still far. If you go back to before you were born, the last major bout of inflation in Canada was late 70s, early 80s. We had numbers in the 13-14% range. That's not hyperinflation by any means. I think when you mean by hyperinflation, are a cycle of inflation, price increases, more inflation with very, very rapid monetary creation. And sometimes this kind of, in the 1970s, I think Brazil, there's inflation around 400% a month. In Zimbabwe, it was in the 1,000,000%. They destroyed the currency with inflation. So I really, really doubt that in North America or in Europe, we're going to get to that point, because the institutions are pretty solid. And if they need to change direction abruptly to stop it, they will. And that's the history. The inflation in Canada and the United States, the 10 to 15% inflation range was actually broken by triggering monetary recessions in 1980 and 1981. So we've been there, done that. It's just that most people were not around, many people were not around to see it. So hyperinflation, no, but inflation certainly, if this is left untended and the quantitative easing continues, in other words, that they cannot unhitch themselves from this practice, inflation is going to become a problem. It's already a problem.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of people out there that complain about this sort of issue, especially there's a term out there, I believe, the gold bug, where people are looking into buying gold as a way of going against protecting themselves from inflation. So there is that genuine concern. But of course, I personally do also believe that hyperinflation is not near as what people are speculating.
No, although I want to say something about gold that's quite interesting. Traditionally, gold was believed to be one of the best inflation hedges or protections against inflation. However, given the patterns and price changes of gold, this has been called into questions in the mining industry and the bullion investment industry. So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. For people, of course, in countries like Canada and the United States, people who can buy real estate assets without taking too much leverage are protecting themselves better now than with gold. But that's an aside.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're now going into our next section, current events. And we discussed supply chains earlier. However, we're going to bring it back to focus here. As the Christmas season approaches, we will see an increase in holiday shopping for a wide variety of consumer goods. However, we are hearing concerns about shortages and a potential lack of stock due to global supply chain problems. Think back to the Evergreen of the Suez Canal. Do you think those concerns are valid?
Thank you. That's a great setup. And I like the picture of this container ship stuck in the Suez Canal. That was an unbelievable thing. I counted the containers in there. I think it was an incredible number of, I forget the exact number, but I'd done a count. Yes, it ties up. Well, it really ties in naturally with what we discussed before, the question about supply chain breakdowns and problems. So certainly that's a contributor to inflation, because now you have more money chasing fewer goods, and people will want to buy. So clearly in the private sector, first year economics book will tell you if there are presumed shortages in certain areas of consumer goods, what's the natural response for the retailers? Raise prices. So obviously, raising prices, you can make the shortage less bad. However, there's still shortages. So some consumers still cannot purchase the good that they would have purchased in normal conditions, right? So yeah, I think the expectations in the market as that this is going to happen, and there'll be early shopping to avoid being disappointed, and so on and so forth. Today, in the Financial Post today, there were discussions about already some shortages in some specific areas of consumer goods. Yes.
Okay. So our next question is on China. So as we know, China is one of the largest players, going back to the supply chain problem, in the global trading scene. However, domestically, they face many problems: power shortages in various provinces, a housing bubble crisis in the form of the Evergrande, and the fear of potential Taiwan annexation grows larger and larger. What do these concerns translate to in the business world, and what should business students really be looking out for when it comes to Chinese problems?
Okay. Well, this is a rapidly evolving situation. There is indeed a lot of attention, both economic and political. Let's leave the political aside for now, but what the situation, okay, so this goes back actually to a couple of years. I think with the Trump years in the United States, created a lot of tension between the US and China, and even between Europe and China. And so this has created bad conditions. But right now, the trends you're describing on that slide are really essentially inflating a lot of additional risks into the situation, because we have the Evergrande situation is definitely something to watch, because I believe it's systemic for China. So in other words, it could take down other areas of the Chinese economy. But we have in other countries, we have some markets in the Western world that have building real estate bubbles, right? And those things tend to, real estate is a real asset, but if this becomes a crisis, as some areas of the real estate industry start falling apart, this contaminates the financial markets that are tied to real estate investments and holding, including the debt, because of the high leverage of those sectors. So this can actually contaminate the whole economy and have a global crisis based on that. So it's a very dangerous situation. It's a good time to be in school. I think very short term for a student, this is an amazing time to be in school. And when I lived through 2 bad recessions when I was a student, I always told myself I was so fortunate to be in school while this was unfolding. And I really didn't really have to worry directly about it, about losing a job or losing some assets or savings, right? So for a student in economics or business, this is stuff to watch on a daily basis because it's very instructive how this will unfold, right? I can't tell you what it's going to be like in 2 months, but it's there's plenty of risk. Let's put it that way.
No, for sure, yeah, especially with all these like domestic issues happening in China. And with regards to the Taiwan annexation problem, many commenters have actually speculated that, you know, what has happened in the United States might, with respect to Afghanistan, many people in Taiwan are concerned about how there's a potential for annexation by China, given, well, this is on the political side, of course. However, I mentioned this because our next question is related to the United States.
Right.
Our neighbor to the south, the presidency of Joe Biden is not being well received, as his approval rating has recently dropped to the Trump levels at a record low of 49.5 approval rating. There are a wide variety of reasons, but many cite problems in healthcare and COVID recovery. What do you make of this news, and what lessons could Canada learn from this?
Yeah, there's an old saying, I forget which politician uttered it, but there's an old saying in Canada, and then when the United States sneezes, Canada gets a cold. Right now, unfortunately, Canada is primarily a bystander. Our relationship with the United States has been better, much better in the past. I would say the time around the negotiation of the 2 free trade agreements, the 1989, 1990 FTA, and then NAFTA in 94, we had an excellent relationship with the United States, and that's actually what made possible the signature of those accords. And it meant a lot to Canada at the time. It was actually more beneficial to Canada than the US. Fast forward to the USMCA that came into force recently. Canada didn't have much leverage at that time. And in fact, we got walked over a little bit in this deal. In other words, we didn't have much to say about it. And the US took a very, very belligerent approach to this. You know, our way or the highway. And not surprisingly, our relationship was not good. And part of it had to do with the relationship between Prime Minister Trudeau and Donald Trump at the time. So, but typically, historically, Republican administrations have been more pro-trade than Democratic administrations. And the Biden administration may well prove this true again. And one thing they certainly done that suggested that they don't care so much about Canada now is that on the first day, so I'll ask you, the IBA panel, what did Biden do on it by executive order at the very beginning of his presidency? He canceled a big project.
Oh, there was the oil pipeline, what was it? It was the one that connected from Alberta to the Keystone XL pipeline, the Keystone XL.
Correct, exactly, the Keystone pipeline. So in Canada, it barely registered. It was like a sucker punch, you know, for the Prime Minister and his team. Because they tell you, Biden, you know, a Democrat, were more politically aligned, more closer to center left. But then you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? More concerns about the environment and emissions, okay, fine. But then the risk is anything that is seen as an environmental, a project with potential environmental damage became a casualty on the first day. So it didn't start on the right way. So Canada is right now not in a situation economically where it has much leverage with the United States. I'm afraid to say. Now, the United States does not manage trade on a day-to-day basis. I think with moving from NAFTA to USMCA between Canada, US, and Mexico, we've entered a world of managed trade where the party with the most bargaining power in trade now in North America has dictated many of the terms of how trade is going to be conducted, you know, with rules, more complex rules of origin, minimum origin in the United States, and so on. So the rules have been tilted more towards the United States. And they've done the same, trying to push Mexico to have higher minimum standards for wages and labor protections and so on. So this is really a managed trade environment. It's not a free trade environment in the sense that everybody can export and import everything they want in the quantities they want. There are a lot of restrictions in this, and that's good to know. So it really complicates the workings of an international business, and it makes it more difficult and costly to trade, for sure. Now, it's not a market you can abandon. You can talk about diversification of trade, but again, if you look at numbers, you look at our the destination of our exports, we have very large markets that have been completely neglected. If you look at India, Africa, not much there. It's more United States, and I include Mexico because it's part of the USMCA agreement, United States, Europe, and China. And after that, you have crumbs here and there, right? So we're not a trade diversified country, although our GDP depends immensely on net exports.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we have a quite centralized focus in terms of like who our trading partners really are. We don't really look at other countries that, you know, could potentially, you know, help boost our net exports. We always look to the United States, Mexico, the European Union, and China.
If I can say another thing about this, just to close the circle on trade, because we're international business after all, it takes trade relations are very, very hard politically there because they're a combination of economic relations and foreign relations. They're very, very hard. And the Trudeau government since 2015 has been very, very interested in managing appearances, in appearing very progressive on climate change and similar issues, gender equality in cabinet, and so on and so forth. Those are all great things, but they're much easier to implement than good trade relations in developing trade markets, and their impacts are much more short-lived. Trade relations take a long time to develop, and they don't seem interested. They haven't seemed very interested in that. They've had initiatives, you know, to enter agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although Prime Minister Trudeau, I will note, missed a signing ceremony on purpose for that, which made Canada look very bad. And when he went to India, he didn't talk about trade. It was like a costume parade. And he spent, I believe, he didn't even spend time with Prime Minister Modi. So this is a huge missed opportunity. It should have been about the economy and trade, and it was not. Essentially, it was almost like a tourism junket for the Prime Minister. Perhaps this is inexperience and not understanding really what's at stake, but that's why political advisors are really important, that people like the Prime Minister and his senior ministers, like finance, international trade, and so on, be advised by people who understand how the world works, right? And that's not the impression that we got.
For sure, there's a very big connection between international relations and business itself. And so when we really want to get those business deals, you know, signed, we probably should have a better understanding of how that political side also plays into it as well.
And be willing to put in the hard work.
Well, I'll go on.
Yeah, and that's, you know, President Trump was in fact former President Obama accused President Trump of not being willing to put in the work in the presidency. But Prime Minister Trudeau has faced the same charge as well, that on the really, really hard files, he hasn't put the time, the hard work, and he's shown a little bit of a disdain for the private sector. So that's, for the business community, those are not good news.
Well, we can only hope for the future, which is going to be our next topic now.
Yes.
Yeah, so with regards to the future, I know we've been discussing very sort of bleak topics with respect to China, the pandemic, our relationship with the United States. But what about our country now with respect to the pandemic? Because this general atmosphere does not seem very hopeful. What do you think of our COVID recovery process in a few words about our country?
I mean, okay, let's assume. So we have a minority. So you're talking about the Canadian response to all that?
That's correct.
Are you focusing on Canada? I don't know. One side of me, I'm really worried about the policy direction. I think the central bank is playing with a lot of risk, inflation risk, and the federal government has not shown any inclination to run a smart fiscal policy. So that worries me quite a bit. In other words, it reduces our margin it reduces our ability to respond well to move outside COVID. And you can't convince, it's not possible anymore to convince people that you can just solve every problem by borrowing money. And unfortunately, that's been the approach taken by the Liberal government. And if you look at an average of government expenditures over the last 6 years, approximately 50 cents out of every dollar that is spent has been borrowed. That's insane. That's very, very high. Unprecedented. If that money is spent in investments that will bring future increases in productivity, standard of living, that's really good. But that hasn't been the case. In fact, the financial help, the federal help for during COVID has done more than 100% income replacement for many people. So this has created a lot of disincentives to work. And in many sectors like hospitality, tourism, a lot of people don't want to work. They've been receiving more money. So unless there's a turnaround there, I'm quite worried about that. And so there seems to be little fiscal discipline, and the central bank seems to be giving an assist to the federal government to keep borrowing costs low by continuing the quantitative easing. So I'm very worried about that personally. But
okay,
no, it's not all bad. This is a minority government. It could fall. There could be a new administration. So of course it's a major inconvenience for people to go back to polls and so on and so forth. But I think you want a responsible captain for the ship, and the current prime minister has not shown that he's on the economic and business side. He has not shown that he's capable of doing that. So this does worry me.
For sure, there's a lot of worries to be out there. But let's try to think on a more positive note now. I'm going to ask the next question with respect for our students. So for
let's keep some time. Let's keep some time for students too, eh?
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah, don't worry. Our question period is almost finished. But this is for students with respect to something that they can hopefully look forward to. Do you think that there are any jobs following this recovery period that are going to be more in demand for students?
Okay, that's a really good question. Again, the context is everything. The really, really positive thing about the job market. So think about short term. If you're in years 1 to 3, you're going to work towards your work term, which is we call now the work integrated learning. This is a job market that's very, very different than the graduate job market, where you're looking for a job after you graduate. Not necessarily a final career, but you want to stabilize things a little bit. So the good thing about the business job market, including, of course, international business, it churns a lot of positions. There's always demand for people. You're going to work in the summer in your third year. Even during the worst of COVID, many students got good positions, working in some cases in person, but in many cases virtually. And it has worked out for many people. Assuming that we transition out of COVID at some pace, which I cannot define now, a lot of the jobs in person will be returning, and they have started to return. If you look at restrictions in most parts of Canada, they're on the way down. So I think that the placement market will remain good, and there will be need. Now, the range of action for the student has increased because you've been studying online. If you've been in the program for at least 2 years, you've had almost 2 full academic years of online instruction. Those are skills that many of you didn't have before, and your professors didn't have before either. So this actually increases the range of the possible positions that you might have. Just like consultants who work abroad, I'm doing a project now for an African country, a consulting project. In 2015, I went there in person. I couldn't go there this year, so I'm doing it online. It's new for a lot of people, right, to do things that way. So I think that market will remain good, very good. For graduates, again, your good graduates, including most of your executive, you're going to be surfing a wave that is pushing graduates to the market who know more how to do things, how to work in different modes than students from my prior cohorts who went through a traditional job market that is in person, right? So I think this is to your advantage. And if employers are looking for new blood, people who are very, very fluent in virtual work, online work, they'll be looking at recent graduates because that's the best group that they're going to find, right? So I think I'm very, very bullish from that point of view in the job market. Now, many of you in this program have other assets. You come from other countries, you know about other business cultures, other ways of doing things, you know other languages, which is an incredibly valuable asset in international business. Many of you know 2. I know some students in the program who know 3 and 4. Those are very, very valuable assets that need to be front and center when you market yourself for jobs. One more thing also for graduates, you're going to do a tough capstone project next semester. You're going to work alongside a real business to do essentially a consulting project for them, an expansion plan. So expansion plan on the marketing side, the distribution, supply chain side, finance side, human resources, and so on and so forth. We have some students in the past who have brought these reports to interviews, and some employers have been blown away by the quality and the quantity of the work that's involved in that. So keep in mind, every asset that you have as a graduate, you've acquired a lot of experience. And unlike other programs, you will do or you have done a work term that is above the industry standard in terms of hours, and the capstone project, which is quite significant in this program. I mean, they differ among the BCom programs. The nature of the exact nature of the capstone project is a little bit different. The one in international business, I can tell you, is quite substantial, and it's a really good model that's worked really well in the past, and the quality of the organizations that have matched with students has been quite exceptional and very diverse, which is a great thing.
Well, that's great news to hear. But hopefully we'll give many of our students who are listening some more hope, and some hope for me as well. So we're just in the interest of time, we're going to wrap up our this section, so that way we can hear from our students now. We're going to ask questions from the floor now. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat, and we will see if Dr. Gendron has any a response to those questions. So for a little warm-up question, before we get started, we know that you've did some PhD work at the University of Toronto. Do you have any tips, very small tips, or like any like business stories from your experience related to that experience for students who want to enter graduate studies?
Yes, yes, of course. In the Canadian system, typically you would move to a master's program after an undergrad degree, and I will say we've had some students in international business who graduated and then went on to do master's programs at University of Toronto, at UBC, at US universities, University of Calgary, so and many more, I forget now. But so the difference I think you have to think is a master's program can be 1 to 2 years, and it does have to be a master's of business administration, right? There are other programs, masters of marketing, masters of information science. We had a student who did a Masters of Information Science and Economics at London School of Economics. It's just that you're more dependent on good grades because there are fewer seats at the master's level. And because the programs are short, they tend to be concentrated. And outside an MBA, you would rapidly acquire technical skills in the field as well. So it's more concentrated, it's more intense. But there's also scholarship help for people who come with really, really good grades. So it's important. If this is an option you might be considering, it's important to manage your grades and try to keep a really good GPA to open doors, right? There are programs that have, many programs have a minimum standard for grades, entering grades, but it's always good to be comfortably above that standard and to have options, right? And grad school is fun. I mean, if you're interested in pushing the discipline, you can do it. The MBA is a little bit different. Some programs at the MBA level will not take students who just graduated. You might have to have some experience, and MBAs tend to be more expensive. So it's important to do good research and talk to people about grad school. I'm certainly a good person to talk to, and I've written a lot of letters of reference which have led to admission. So I'm happy to talk to anyone in person if they want.
Okay, well, thank you for that advice. So we're going to take our first question from our audience.
Yes.
Viet says, like any economy, it expands and contracts with the COVID pandemic, causing Canada into a recession. Is it safe to say we're at the stage of coming out of the recession and is graduating during the expansion?
Yes, we are in a recovery stage, but with an important qualification. There is still a lot of stimulus help by central banks and governments, and the concern is what happens to this recovery if this stimulus is taken out, right? We don't know. So there are a couple of intangibles here. We don't know which pace the government's going to do that. They would be crazy to pull the plug on every stimulus in a hurry, but there's a debate now going on in the small business sector in Canada where today actually in the paper, there was an article about the Canadian Federation of Independent Business arguing for an extension of certain kinds of federal assistance to businesses in the hospitality and tourism sector because they've been hurt the most, right? So there's a concern there that when the assistance to cover rent and wages is pulled back, there could be some more turbulence in those sectors. So yes, it's a recovery, but it depends on other factors. And also there's the inflation problem that you mentioned earlier.
Okay, well, our next question comes from Lucas. Africa is currently the fastest growing continent in the world. I'm wondering how their rapid development could impact Canada or the rest of the globe in near decades. There could be totally new power players before the century is over.
That's an excellent question. It's a continent that foreign policy in Canada has more or less ignored. There's always been a lot of emphasis on international aid through CEDA and with Canada, but there's been very, very little attention and effort devoted to developing economic and trade relations. So you can give assistance to a country in ways other than just giving aid money. There are a lot of other ways, right? Foreign direct investment, building plants, equipment, things like that, transfers of technology, transfers of technical assistance, you know, how to do things and so on and so forth. So Canada has very much neglected that. So have the United States, by the way. So as a result, China has filled that vacuum in spades, and China is very, very involved in very large infrastructure projects on the African continent and Southeast Asia, with some concerns about the techniques used to do that, but that's for another day. That's a long discussion. So I suppose the best thing I would say is write a letter to your MP and tell them to pay attention to the African continent, because the potential is immense. That's my view. And I've done a lot of projects in Africa. I've been in person on the continent about almost 15 times for projects, and the potential is immense, but it's in Canada, we're not paying attention.
All right. So we are going to go to our next question. This one's from Darian. He writes, how do you see the international business program adapting to this current business environment? COVID related.
Okay, good question. I'm happy to say that it's adapting in the present tense, in the sense that the onset of the pandemic. So we haven't had the last live class, I think, was the week of March 15th, March 10th in 2020. So I think the adaptation has been primarily technological. So the pedagogical tricks for moving education distance and online have been known for a long time, but you never know how well that fits a program or a set of courses until you do it live. So now we have been doing this for almost 2 full years, which is, it's remarkable to think about that. In a way, it's really distressing, but in another way, you know, we're thinking, you know, if we go back in person, we'll put this behind us. But we know on both sides, the student side very much, I pointed out earlier, but also the operation of the school, we know how to do things now that we didn't know to do well in the past, or many of us hadn't taught online. And we know that there are a lot of events that can be run much more efficiently in person, online than in person. It always depends what you want to do, right? So in an ideal world, you would want to run a convocation in person because of the importance of the thing. Same thing with the capstone projects, but we've been able to do a lot that way. And in the case of capstones, it's worked remarkably well. So it was not the ideal format, but we made it work, and everybody learned a lot in doing this. And you have skills now that you bring in your toolbox to the market that you were not going to acquire without COVID, which is interesting, right?
No, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of different soft skills that we've had to learn. So we're going to be taking our last question for tonight.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on remote work, and is it here to stay?
Oh, that's okay. That's a tough one. You have to look at the supply and demand side of things here. A lot of employers, it depends on the industry always, right? But there are more employers than one thinks that who want employees to get back. So it's not just a matter that it's feasible technologically to do remote work. It saves money, it saves rental costs. It's much more complicated than that. Those are considerations, but a lot of employers have concerns about productivity of people not being there at the office, right? And the quality of the communication, and also the fatigue, right? If you're working online, you're studying online all the time, it's very, very exhausting. And I think in the after about one semester into the pandemic where we moved online, it's a warning there just to keep in mind that some students had a bit of a tap out, an online tap out around week 9, week 10 because of the fatigue on being online. So this takes a toll on people. Never mind the mental health toll having to do with changing your routines, the lockdowns and all of that stuff. So I think it's more a question of balance, and some people perhaps are more suited to doing this. I mean, my preference personally is to teach in person. There's no question about that. It's a very different kind of thing. So there are some pros and cons, right? There are time savings, but you think about it, if you're working online, you're shopping online, you're studying online, on paper, you save a lot of money, time and money. But the question is, what do you do with that extra time? And psychologists and psychiatrists have been telling us that if you're using the extra time to spend more online time, you could be harming yourself. So it's very much something to be aware of, that to manage the online time and very much do other things with your time, like going for walks. Personally, I do yoga almost every morning in the week, 5:30 to 6:30. I've changed a lot of things to handle this, right? And it's you have to be quite disciplined. In fact, with online work, you have to be more disciplined than with in-person work. It's not just a matter anymore of shaving and showing up for a man or for a woman, dressing and makeup and all that. It's how you spend your time doing what and when, right? So if your school is your priority and for now you're studying online, this makes the other online pursuits like entertainment and crushing boredom much less important. And just pay attention to what's happening to Facebook right now in the United States and in the media, just to see the limits. This is not the online medium is not a limitless medium, and it's not a zero cost medium. It has a lot of hidden costs that we have to keep in mind. We have to manage ourselves. We have to be disciplined in doing that. I think that's the best advice I would give, is for people to assess personally how much they want to use that. It's convenient, but you have to look at other things too, right?
Well, thank you for all the questions. We're now going to be wrapping it up. So I'm going to pass it on to Kamal, and she is going to just say a quick couple of words.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gendron. It was really informative. And the discussion, I wish we could have more time because we still have 2 answers that didn't got answered. So we'll email you those, and we'll share the answers with the persons on Instagram or through their email. And here is a quick feedback form that we want all of you to fill and tell us how we did for the podcast. And we'll be coming with the second podcast series shortly, hopefully before the final exams. Stay tuned for that. And we really appreciate you being here, taking the time to come and listen and participate and asking for all the great questions. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening. All the best for the midterm exams. And we hope to see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gendron, for showing up on our podcast in the first of our series. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up for this event. Stay tuned. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.